Well, the LSO has quite an interesting archive, and with the centenary of the First World War coming up, we thought we'd start having a look to see what the LSO did, because the LSO's the only London orchestra that's still surviving from that era, and obviously we wanted to find out what the LSO did, whether it continued, whether it stopped playing during the First World War, what its players did, how things back home affected the way they did concerts, maybe the repertoire and stuff like that. And we had quite an interesting time searching through the archive, and it often led to avenues which we weren't quite expecting, which has been one of the most fascinating things. We also looked into what happened to one of the founder members, who was the famous horn player Adolf Borsdorf. It won't surprise you to know from that name that he was German. And he was really considered to be one of the most influential horn players of his time. And we looked through the minutes and discovered that he was gradually demoted throughout the first couple of years of the First World War. And there's a record of a letter he wrote where he'd been banned from playing with the orchestra for no other reason. And he asked, as anti-German sentiment was now subsiding slightly, and this was in 1916, if he could play again with the orchestra. And unfortunately, a week before his letter arrived at the board was when the first Zeppelin raids started on London. We've been in touch with his great-grandchildren, and what was interesting was that he eventually was asked for his resignation from the orchestra, which is looking at it now, seems like a fairly shameful episode in the history of the orchestra. He was one of the people who started the orchestra, and yet just because of this terrible war he was cast out. Now, he never played the horn again, and his great-grandchildren tell us that the family had a brick thrown through their window in London, and the feeling was so much that his sons, who also played the horn, changed their name to an English name. So that's been quite an unexpected thing to find out, actually. We've been looking into individual players in the LSO. We've followed several of them who had various campaigns. There was Eli Hudson, who was a flute player. Now, flute players know who Eli Hudson was because he was a bit of a superstar of his day. He played in the LSO, but he was also a very famous part of a music hall act called Olga, Elgar and Eli Hudson. He played with his sister and his wife, who was a soprano. They used to be top of the bill in all the music halls around Britain. Now, what's interesting about Eli is that I spotted his name because I teach at the Royal College of Music, and his name appears on the War Memorial in the foyer. And so I looked into him. I spoke to various flute friends who knew a bit about him. I wasn't quite prepared for what I found, because he didn't join up straight away. He was in late 30s, early 40s when the war began. And in 1915, Christmas 1915, he went with a troupe called the National Theatre at the Front, they called themselves. And it was an impresario who took some actors, some musicians out to Belgium, to a military hospital and to the front to entertain the troops. Now, of course, that's something that we're still familiar with today. What was slightly amusing was that to entertain the troops who were ill in hospital, him and his sister played piccolo duets. Not something I would associate with recuperation, but there you go. And he went over there and saw, there's a description in a newspaper of what he saw there. And early on in the war, the news that was coming back home was that it was going to be over by Christmas. Well, this was Christmas, and there were a lot of injured men there. Now, he played there, saw what was going on. I don't know whether it was what he saw there that made him change his mind. I don't know whether it was where Sidney Moxham, who he played with, lived round the corner, was killed in action, that made him change his mind. But at some point he joined up later on in the war, and he went off to fight. And he sadly is on the War Memorial in the Royal College of Music. So we're still, at this moment in time, still finding out exactly what happened to him. But it's interesting that these, it really gives a sense of everybody doing their bit, as it were. He probably could have carried on entertaining troops and doing his bit like that, but he decided to do something else, as did everybody. And of course the LSO is just a little microcosm of society, of what everybody was doing at that time.